Good morning, everybody. Good evening, good afternoon, depending on when you're watching this. I'd like to welcome you. My name is Evan Ashworth, and I'm a lecturer in the Department of Communication and Journalism at the University of New Mexico. I also serve as the director of the MA program and the director of the the face-to-face and online public speaking program. More relevant for the purpose of this presentation today, I served as a fellow and consultant for the Student Experience Project since the fall of 2022. And I just want to make a note that this presentation is being recorded. So first of all, thank you to those of you who are attending via live stream, but also if you're watching this presentation later on our department YouTube channel, I want to extend a thank you to you as well. So, by way of an overview, I just want to mention what we're going to be doing in this presentation. And I first must acknowledge that this is a half presentation, half workshop. Yes, by virtue of the modality, I will be delivering this digitally, but I want to encourage you to think of this as a workshop in the following ways. As I'm talking about my experience with the Student Experience Project, I would encourage you to bring up a course syllabus that you've used last semester or that you're using this semester, and even one specific course assignment, the prompt and the rubric that you might use for that. And just to have them on the background on your monitor as I'm talking, or perhaps in the foreground, so that you can examine different aspects of the syllabus and the language used in assignment prompts, because I will invite you to perhaps revise language in these documents in very specific ways to achieve these evidence-based practices for the Student Experience Project. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Student Experience Project is, and I'll probably stop saying the Student Experience Project because it is such a lengthy term, and I'll just say SEP, S-E-P. So after discussing the history of SEP and sort of the scope of this project, I'm going to talk about specific strategies or practices that we as instructors can, and I would argue should, be incorporating into our classes, regardless of the classes that we teach. But third, along the way, I'm going to be sharing my own experience in SEP-ifying one of my classes, which is the public speaking course that is offered through our Department of Communication and Journalism here at the University of New Mexico. So again, I really encourage you to have these documents open and just look at them as I'm talking to you about them, because this is where the workshop component comes in. And obviously it takes time to revise a syllabus, to create an assignment prompt, but being willing to revisit that and look for places of improvement. I hope to speak to some of these areas with the practices and principles that are founded in SEP. Now, before I go any further, I want to say that because you are attending this presentation and you're workshopping your syllabus and perhaps an assignment prompt, you're clearly invested in teaching, and I want to commend you for that. But if you're interested in teaching, as we all are, hopefully, then I want to encourage you to attend or even present at this semester's Spring 2025 Teaching Conference. This is hosted by the Center for Teaching and Learning at the University of New Mexico. And if you don't already know, it's a fantastic resource that is available to all instructors and students at the University of New Mexico. So I'm going to be talking at this conference and perhaps about some of the experience that I'll be sharing with you all today. So again, this is going to take place on April 9th and April 10th on the University of New Mexico campus. But I encourage you to not just attend, but consider actually presenting. And that deadline will be on March 25th, but you can use this QR code in the corner of the screen to find more information about that. All right, so let me just spend a few minutes talking about what the Student Experience Project is and kind of where it came from. This is a relatively new project that it has a goal of promoting increased equity in academic outcomes, which is a very broad, achievable goal, but it can be very difficult, especially in the sort of economic climate and institutional climate that we all find ourselves in higher learning, for example. So perhaps the most important resource that I can offer to you is a website that is studentexperienceproject.org. And I would really encourage you to just open up another window on your computer or a tab, whatever you prefer, so that you can look through this website and the different sections, especially the SEP Resource Hub, because that's the source for so much of the content that I'm sharing with you, as well as the scholarship that supports these evidence-based practices in teaching. So the goal of the Student Experience Project is to improve retention and graduation rates for all students to create an equitable and positive university experience through evidence-based teaching practices. Though there is a focus on people who have come from traditionally marginalized and disenfranchised communities, various categories of difference. So just thinking about ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, to the extent maybe a student might be a first-generation college student or a non-traditional student. We want to ensure through the Student Experience Project that all of these students have a seat at the table, because traditionally they haven't, or even now, they don't have the ease of access that many other students do in higher ed. So this was really the origins of where the Student Experience Project came from about 5 or 6 years ago. And currently there are 300 faculty members across 6 universities that are working with researchers as part of SEP, and I am proud to be one of them. So the University of New Mexico is one of these 6 universities that is piloting the Student Experience Project, and so we hope to bring this message and the SEP principles to other universities in the future. So at UNM specifically, there are about 135, maybe around 140 faculty now from 10 University of New Mexico colleges across all 4 branch campuses. And there are about 43 departments that have used SEP with about 3,000 students. So I want to take a just sort of look at this nationally and present some interesting statistics. That nationally, there was a 10.5% increase in positive student experience and a 25% increase in positive student experience among women of color specifically experiencing high financial stress. There is also a 22% decrease in Ds, Fs, and Ws since this has been initiated at a national level and for which we have statistics to support. So if we look at UNM specifically, I just want to point out one semester and focus on that for a moment, and that is the fall 2021 semester. Unfortunately, it takes maybe a year or two for these data to be updated. This isn't so long ago, but the reason why I want to briefly focus on this semester is that, as you remember, the fall of 2021 was the first semester in which students reconvened for face-to-face classes after COVID. And so it was a particularly challenging semester for students and for staff and faculty alike. And in these sections where SEP was used in comparison with the same classes taught by the same instructors prior to SEP, there was a 2% decrease in fail and withdraw rates, but also a 10% increase in A's and B's. 2% and 10%, they may not seem like huge numbers, but these small steps can lead to incremental gains over time that are really important to help ensure that these retention and graduation rates keep increasing, which is what we want. We want our students to matriculate through the university and get the degrees that they came for. So in a STEM context specifically, 92% of students in SEP STEM classes were retained in the STEM pipeline in fall of 2021 through the spring of 2022. And we're just highlighting that because even though I don't teach a STEM class, I come from something of a STEM discipline in linguistics, and we all know some of the negative perceptions, or not negative, let's say, some of the, intimidating nature of these classes. They really scare students, especially coming out of COVID in fall 2021, when so many students might have felt unprepared to be a student in a class like biology, chemistry, or physics. And so to see 92% of these students retained, in part because of STEM principles and practices that were used in these classrooms, being retained from the fall 2021 to spring 22, I think that's one of these indicators of success of the program, again, specific to STEM disciplines. So let's talk a little bit about public speaking. Now, many of you may be attending this workshop or looking at it afterwards in the recording because you teach public speaking, in which case you know all about this. But I want to take a couple minutes and talk about this class for those of you who maybe teach in a different department and are unfamiliar with the public speaking course. So, as I mentioned earlier, I'm the director of the public speaking program here at UNM in our department, and this is a general education course. So it was deemed important enough by the university such that most students either take this course or it's a choice among relatively few courses that they have to take. General education courses are generally, valued such that they are seen as relevant to all students regardless of their major. And yes, I'm biased because I'm the director of the program, but I do feel it is one of the most important courses for all university students. especially given the challenges that many university students had coming out of COVID and that maybe still persists in college classrooms today. So there are, in any given fall or spring semester, about 30 sections face-to-face and online. The face-to-face sections are capped at about 24 students and about 30 students for the online sections. So they're relatively manageable, but something you should know about this course, and maybe you already do, is that the course itself is relatively easy. It is, after all, intended as a first-year course for communication students. So it's very often taken by first semester freshmen or freshmen and sophomores, students who are early in their undergraduate career. But this, it's a well-known, I guess, cliche that many students fear the prospect of public speaking more than death itself. And so while there may not be this intimidating kind of terminology in public speaking courses to the extent that you see in STEM disciplines or even upper level courses in communication, there's this perception that public speaking is scary. There's a stigma against it. Many people just don't want to do it. So this is something that I kind of wrestle with and how I use SEP to kind of help me as an instructor and to make my classroom not just a welcoming space in terms of who our students are, but to make sure they know that they can succeed at this class and in this context that they might have been scared of before entering it. So that's the public speaking class, and now I want to return to the student experience project because first I want to reiterate the importance of this website. This is where the Student Resource Hub specifically is providing a lot of strategies and practices that you can actually bring into your classroom. This could be in terms of the syllabus, in terms of the way you deliver feedback on student assignments, the language that you use just generally in talking to students in class, or even through messaging like emails or Canvas course messages. So these drivers can be sort of three broad learning objectives, if you will. I sort of think of them as analogous to student learning objectives, except they are more like what we should be doing as educators, instructors in the classroom. And I'm going to talk about each of these in turn, starting with practices and principles relating to equitable academic and social supports, providing supportive instructor and course interactions, and hopefully contributing to student-centered institutional structures and policies in our classrooms. So let's talk about each of these in turn, starting with the equitable academic and social supports. So let me pause and just say that a lot of the strategies, practices that I'm going to offer in the next, say, 30 minutes, you may already be doing in your classroom, in which case that is great. All of these, I think, are relatively minor tweaks and changes, whether it's language in the syllabus or the kind of messaging and framing that you're using in class activities. They're little changes that we can do, but it does take time. So again, this is why it's useful to have your syllabus out and maybe even a specific course assignment prompt and rubric. So the first thing that I want to encourage you to do as instructors, if you're not already doing this, is to normalize academic difficulty. Now, this may not be as important, perhaps, in a class like public speaking, which, as I just acknowledged, is really intended for early-level undergraduate students, and so they already may not be too stressed about the class itself and their prospect in getting a good grade, but it's more like the humanistic terror of possibly giving a 3 to 4 minute speech about their favorite book, for example. But it's really important to normalize academic difficulty in STEM disciplines, and I think even in public speaking classes as well. This is part of ensuring that your classroom is a safe space in terms of social belonging, that students don't feel like imposters in your classroom. And I can recognize a lot of that imposter syndrome in my own experience. So I left off by talking about normalizing academic difficulty. And I just want to mention a couple places where we as instructors can do this. First of all, it's the language that we use in describing the courses themselves. It's very easy to use boilerplate language from, say, a course catalog to describe our course in the syllabus itself. And that's all well and good, but I might ask you to consider revising that to include language that normalizes academic difficulty. And there are examples of this in the SEP Resource Hub, of language that you could use to put into your syllabus. So we want to acknowledge that students might come to certain courses with certain fears and preconceptions about what the field might involve and how intimidating certain assignments might be. And with a course like public speaking, that's not really any different because so many students feel that they struggle with public speaking. So as an extension of this, I also want to encourage you as an instructor to take on what's called early intervention messaging. Unfortunately, we know that many students, they're not able to attend class all the time. They have to work, they might have to travel, they might be sick. All of these reasons could happen in one semester. But when they happen early on in a semester, we as instructors know that that might be a high chance that the student is falling behind. And so you might already do this, but it's very easy to forget to do this because after all, it just takes a little bit of time for you as an instructor to do this. But once you have the language, you can basically copy and paste that into any email and personalize it by using the student's name. But the reason why we should be doing this and doing it early on is there's evidence to suggest that when we use early intervention messaging early on, like in the first 4 weeks of the semester, once we've identified that a student is perhaps struggling, they're not coming to class, they're not performing as well as they can on assignments, then, well, we want to reach out to them. And I think the best place to start is through, say, an email message or a Canvas course message that could then be reinforced by an in-class talk with the student, perhaps just briefly after class. Now, I also want to mention this third point, which is important, to communicate about course withdrawal options. This is language that's often included in a syllabus, but we tend not to talk about it, for example, on the first day. And that's a little thing to do, but it's really important, and to revisit that discussion at the end of the semester, because many students don't know what a withdrawal is and why it might be advantageous to accept a withdrawal rather than, say, a failing grade, typically an F or a D. So a withdrawal has this advantage in that it doesn't decrease the student's GPA. It's as if they never took the class. It almost never affects their financial aid. So there's more reasons to suggest that a student would rather take a withdrawal rather than a D or a final grade of an F in the course. But they don't necessarily know that option exists, and it is up to us as educators to initiate that conversation. Certainly in the syllabus, but by talking about it throughout the rest of the semester so that students know that they don't have to fail a course necessarily. We all understand, some things happen, you have to work, you get sick, that prevent you from completing the requirements for a semester. No problem. We'll let you start that class fresh and start anew in a different semester without a penalty on your record. Now I'd like to move to the second driver here that is mentioned in the SEP Resource Hub, and there are several of these. This is arguably the most important out of these three drivers. And there's actually a fourth driver on there, but I'm mentioning three of these because they are the three drivers that we can control inside the classroom and outside the classroom as educators. So let's talk about some supportive instructor and course interactions. The first is to create a belonging story. This belonging story I found in teaching public speaking is incredibly important, not just through what I hear students talk to me about this semester, but I also see it appear every single time in course evaluations. When students rate me highly as an instructor and rate the class highly as an instructor, it's often because they're commenting on my sharing a story. And so this is a place where I want to share some kind of advice on how to do this. First, I want to acknowledge that when you're sharing a social belonging story in the About Your Instructor section, I think it involves putting your vulnerabilities out there a little bit. And that might be difficult to do, I recognize, especially as a relatively new instructor in the classroom, where you might be concerned about your students perceiving you as an authority figure. I totally understand that, but I would still argue that you can say things such as the following in the About Your Instructor section. In my own section, in this section in the syllabus, I admit to having a lot of insecurities with public speaking in the past, and in fact still wrestle with these insecurities now. Certainly as an undergraduate, but continuing to this day, I experience nerves and anxiety before every presentation I give, before every class I teach. And it's important to share this, sort of where you come from as an educator. First of all, in your syllabus, but don't stop there and don't just mention it maybe on the first day of class. Almost like every week, maybe even every class, you're reminding students that public speaking is a skill that you can improve upon and that you may never be perfect at. I acknowledge to my students that although I'm the director of the public speaking program in the department, I still have the kind of nerves and anxiety that we all face as human beings. Just this little sort of admission, or kind of putting that vulnerability out there, if you will, it goes such a long way for students, especially with a course like public speaking, where they may have, well, they might be intimidated at the prospect of speaking in front of their peers, in front of the whole class, or even in small groups, maybe even one-on-one. So it starts with you and the messaging you provide in your syllabus, but perhaps more importantly, reinforced in class all the time. Also maybe course messages as well. So another sort of strategy for providing a being a supportive instructor and providing supportive interactions is ensuring classroom identity safety. This is something I think we all know to value in the abstract as educators, but we might just put only a diversity statement in the syllabus, and we don't really talk about that the rest of the semester. It's good, and I think it's really necessary to have a diversity statement in your syllabus, and there are examples, again, on the Student Experience Project website for how to do that. But it doesn't stop there. I think it has to be reinforced through in-class discussions and perhaps through email or course messages. Now, something else that is really important with ensuring classroom identity safety is ensuring that students know about really vital resources on campus. Because many students who take public speaking are in their early undergraduate career, or maybe even it's their first semester as a UNM student, they may not even know about these resources, or they heard about them during Lobo orientation and had since forgot about them. So these campus resources might include, for example, the LGBTQ Resource Center, the ethnicity centers on campus, which is American Indian Student Services, African American Student Services, and El Centro de la Raza. And there's also a really important office that is called the Office of Compliance, Ethics, and Equal Opportunity. And this office is vital as a place where students can go if they feel that they have been sexually harassed, if they have been bullied in any way, face discrimination in any way. These resources, so many students just don't necessarily know about, and it is our role as instructors to remind them. Again, not just in the syllabus and not just talking about it on the first day of class, but reminding them throughout class and bringing these resources up in timely ways depending on the context of an in-class discussion, for example. So let's talk about a couple other practices or strategies that you can incorporate into your class, whether it's public speaking, a STEM class, or anything else, because all of these are relevant for any class that you might teach. So this next one is what's called creating an attuned or a psychologically attuned assessment wrapper. There are examples, again, on the SEP website for how to do this, but there's essentially 3 steps to creating an assessment wrapper. The first step is to share the best strategies or common mistakes relating to an assignment. So in the public speaking classroom, for example, when I talk about presentation number 4, this is the final presentation that a student delivers in public speaking. It is the highest stakes assignment in my class and is therefore perhaps the most intimidating. There is this additional challenge that they're not actually delivering that presentation in class, they're actually submitting a video, ideally an unlisted YouTube video. So there's a number of working parts and logistical challenges here. And so it's important when talking about an assignment like that I don't just say, here's what you're expected to do, here's how long you should speak for, here's how you upload an unlisted YouTube video, regardless of the device you're using. That's all important, but you're actually just sitting down and saying, here's some really common mistakes that students do. Like maybe they're editing too much in the video, they're including music, they're unintentionally doing things that might distract the viewer. So this might seem like a really common thing, and maybe you already do this in every assignment that you give to your students. If so, great. But if not, it's something that I want to encourage you to do because it's absolutely vital for student success in that assessment or in that assignment, if you will. So after the assignment, then I think it's really important to have students complete a short reflection exercise. And so we want to call back to the exercise before the next assessment. Now, we also want to support financially stressed students to the best way that we can here. And this means offering resources to our students in the syllabus, like the Lobo Food Pantry. This is one of these vital resources that our students might not know exist, but we do want to remind them of this because it's very new and we found it's increasingly being used by students. For example, in my public speaking class last semester, about 40% of my students indicated struggling with basic needs securities. And so it is just vital that we remind students of these resources, because how can we expect students to complete their assignments if they literally don't have enough to eat? So that resource is one that I don't just refer to in my syllabus, but I'm always coming back during the semester. Like, hey, don't forget about this resource. Have any of you used the resource? You're taking a few minutes like at the beginning of class to just normalize the use of this resource, because many people might feel embarrassed to have to go to such a place, and there is no reason to feel that way. Now, here's something else that can be tricky, but I think it's an important part of supporting financially stressed students specifically, is being flexible with our attendance policies and also our deadlines as instructors. This can be a real balancing act, and I recognize that, because we want to communicate the importance to students of attending each and every class, but we also have to acknowledge that that just may not be feasible, that especially in this economic climate, students might have to work, and that work might conflict with their schedule. So yes, a lot of this might be based on trust and ensuring that our students are communicating with us consistently through email and or in person about their work schedule, but it's not like the university environment, say 20 or 30 years ago. So many more students have to work now as a way to try to pay their way through college. And so I think it's our role as responsible educators to be understanding of that, and that should be reflected in our attendance policy. So not necessarily dropping students after, say, 6 absences, but it maybe is more on an individual basis depending on the student. Now, this is also the same strategy with late work policies. We all know, as those of us who teach classes, that it can be annoying when our students submit work late, and it's very easy to just say, I don't accept any late work whatsoever. But as I found over the last few years, that is just necessary, given what I mentioned about students' non-academic commitments and needs just outside of the university. And so I would encourage you at the very least to think about maybe extending a deadline, perhaps without penalty, but maybe with a minor penalty such as, say, 10% or maybe 20%, to say to students that it's still a matter of fairness a lot of times, making sure that everybody submits an assignment before a deadline, but also acknowledging that some students have different challenges than other students. And again, that's where our attendance and late work policies come in. Now, let me talk about 2 more important strategies for being a supportive instructor in and outside the classroom and providing course interactions that are supportive. And this is conveying a growth mindset. This is an incredibly important practice that is very easy not to do as an instructor, or to do the opposite. So what a growth mindset is this idea that ability is not fixed, it is not innate, that abilities can be improved with work and consistent effort, engagement with peers, and you as an instructor. And so this can, again, be reflected in the language that you use in your syllabus, examples for which are on the SEP website, but it's also reinforced through your verbal messaging in class, perhaps written messages through course messages, or an email as well. So we want students to know that, especially say with a subject like public speaking, where students might enter the class feeling, all right, I'm going to take this gen ed course, but I know I'm never going to be a public speaker. Many students feel that way, and many students I've heard say that to me. It's so important for us to push back on that and say, hey, wait a minute. Just because you might feel that you are not good at public speaking doesn't mean, one, that you are, because you probably are better than you think, but you can certainly improve upon your skills as a public speaker. This goes across all of the subjects, all of the disciplines that are taught at UNM. Just think about your own experience as an undergraduate student. How easy it is to feel that way, taking a class that you think is outside of your comfort zone, and how easy it is to give up and just say, I resign, I'm never going to be good at this. And who's going to bring you back? It's going to be a responsible teacher or perhaps a peer that reminds you, hey, you can grow at these skills. It's a very easy thing to do, but it's also very easy to forget to do it. It's so important. And then lastly, I want to mention the importance of using a wise feedback framing statement. I'm going to return to this strategy in a future workshop when I kind of talk more about how to provide feedback on student assignments, because this is one of our contexts as instructors where we can teach, is how we provide constructive feedback on student assignments. And one of these ways is by using what's called a wise feedback statement. And this feedback statement, which is mentioned on the website for SEP, it has 3 steps. And the first is to identify for you a key assignment that you would use this framing assignment for. So this is to say that you don't necessarily have to use a WISE feedback framing statement for every assignment that you give. But there are certain assignments, as you know, that are more important than others. Those high stakes assignments especially that might come towards the end of class. Now, for example, in public speaking, with the first presentation, I have a very low bar because I just want students to get up in front of the class and speak about their personal experience and deliver a personal narrative. I don't even care if it's in English. I just want them to gain more comfort in this uncomfortable space. And so I don't use a WISE feedback framing statement for that first assignment because it's all about just inviting them into doing public speaking and being part of this classroom community. So I really don't provide much more feedback than great job, thank you for sharing your story, because that's all this first assignment is intended to do. For presentation number 3 and 4, however, when I'm asking my students to engage in an argument, which requires citing sources and so forth, this is where I want to use these WISE feedback framing statements. And again, on the website for SEP, there's really specific language that you can use that communicates that you have standards as an instructor, but that you know your students can meet these standards. For public speaking, that's probably easy to do because it's, let's be honest, probably a less intimidating course than something like an introductory physics course. So in those STEM disciplines especially, it is just so vitally important to acknowledge that as a student, they're going to have perhaps negative perceptions about a subject, but they can get better at it and that you have standards that they can meet. And so this third step is really to just, once you've constructed the wording of that statement, is to make sure, not just by proofreading, but that each word communicates what you want. And I just want to give you an example of this. I think it's very common, for example, in a diversity statement in a syllabus to use a word like tolerance. But just think about what tolerance means as a word and as it's maybe applied in an engineering context. Tolerance is kind of what we are willing to put up with, but it is often used as these words like, we need to tolerate all people. Is that really a word we should be using in our diversity statement? No, it's probably not strong enough, in my opinion. We shouldn't just be tolerating differences, we should be inviting and encouraging them, right? So this is a very specific example of how little words that we use unintentionally communicate really hurtful things to students that aren't going to help them as students in any respect. So these statements that I've talked about here over the last couple of slides, creating a belonging story, ensuring classroom identity safety, creating an attuned assessment wrapper, supporting our financially stressed students through these strategies, creating a growth mindset, and responding to students using a WISE feedback strategy, they're all part of this idea of being a supportive instructor and using this for really supportive course interactions. So I now want to move on to the last driver, which is dealing with this notion of student-centered institutional structures and policies. And so even though we may not be a college dean or a provost or a president, there are some things that we can do as instructors to contribute to this sort of institutional structure to kind of get at a more kind of welcoming, inclusive environment for the university, not just for your class and not just for the Department of Communication and Journalism, for example. So one of these strategies is to utilize student experience data to improve classroom environment. And I'm talking specifically here about surveying students. If you've taught before, you know that at the end of the semester, students have an opportunity to complete course evaluations. And I'm not saying these are unimportant. They provide really useful information, but it's really just restricted to views about the course, views about the teacher, and it's only once at the very end of the semester. So you get this feedback and you can only really apply it towards future classes in other semesters, right? So what I want to encourage you to think about doing is surveying your students during the semester. And specifically, as part of my participation in SEP, I work with a platform called Copilot Ascend. And if you contact me, then I can help you to perhaps use this platform. And even if you don't want to use that platform, here's what you can do in surveying your students. You're essentially going to be asking questions that I'll talk about in the next slide that address categories of difference. things and ways different students might be perceiving the college experience differently. And so you can do this in a couple ways. I found that when you offer a survey like this through extra credit, students will do it. Most students will snap at the opportunity to earn extra credit, even if it's just a few points. There's just something about extra credit that students always want. They'll do it. It's maybe not a 100% response rate, but it will be high if you're framing it as an extra credit assignment and constantly reminding students about it. But you could also actually just administer it in class and incorporate it into a group activity. And in that sense, you get a 100% response rate. It's entirely up to you. I'm kind of playing with which one of these I prefer. And so last semester I did sort of just administering these surveys in class. And this semester I'm playing with using it as an extra credit assignment. But either way, I'm getting really important data about who my students are and how they perceive their learning as a student in this class and at UNM. So they're not teaching-centered questions. They're not like the same sort of questions you get in course evaluations. They are centered on the student experience. So in a moment, I'll share a couple examples of the questions you might consider asking, but the idea is to do this, I think, 3 times throughout the semester. So if this is, for example, a 16-week class that you're teaching, is to consider administering this survey in the first, or maybe the second week of class, but really early on. And then at some point near the middle of the semester. I tend to do this in the 7th week of the semester. And then at the very end of class, around the 15th or the 16th week, depending on how many weeks of instruction there are. So you're doing this 3 times per semester, and it's giving you, I think, a much more interesting dynamic indicator of how students' attitudes might change throughout the semester. And so if you couple that survey with the course evaluations at the end of the semester, I think you're getting a much more complete picture of students' perceptions of their learning experience. So what about some of these questions? Well, these are some of the questions that I use in this platform called Copilot Ascend. And these are Likert scale questions where students say, I think it's a 5-point scale where they essentially go from strongly agree to strongly disagree. And so there are different metrics in these categories, such as identity, safety, social belonging, self-efficacy, growth mindset, trust and fairness, that are used as metrics to kind of organize the data in the surveys you collect. So an example of these questions might be a student sees, quote, I worry that people's evaluations of me will be affected by my group membership. This could be race, gender, social class, or other categories of difference. And so this is not a question that a student's going to get on course evaluations, but it's something I really want to know from my students. Do they feel that they are in a safe space? Or a second example of this is, quote, I feel like I belong in this class. And this is really important, perhaps, in a public speaking class, yes, but just also think about if you're teaching, say, a research-intensive course where students may be all the more intimidated because they feel they don't have a lot of experience doing capital R research. So I would want to know as an instructor that teaches, say, communication research methods, what kind of perception do they have about the extent to which they feel they belong in a class like this? And then a third example here in terms of self-efficacy involves the wording, quote, I feel confident about my ability to do well in this class. So it's not just about social belonging, it's about how confident are they that they will succeed in this class. This is something that I also want to know, and why I include in this survey. Another example is the instructor seems to believe that students have a certain amount of intelligence and they can't really do much to change it. So notice here that we're kind of switching the wording. So we hope that students don't say, oh, I absolutely agree. We hope that they're saying we disagree. Because as instructors, we want to convey a growth mindset, that students have the ability to improve regardless of the discipline. And then the last example here in terms of trust and fairness is just, quote, the instructor treats me with respect. And so many times as instructors, we might feel that we are respecting our students and using language to communicate that, but maybe our students feel differently. And again, they might provide examples of that. What I didn't mention is that with all of these questions, there is an opportunity for students to not just provide an answer on a Likert scale, but to provide an open-ended comment. And many students choose to do that. That's like the most valuable data that I collect from this survey. But the whole point is to ask questions to learn more about who our students are, where they come from, and you can really see some interesting patterns emerge when you disaggregate the data to see, for example, how are my students who identified as struggling with basic needs securities, how are they perceiving the class? And there might be very different patterns than with students who are considered, say, basic needs secure. So this is where I want to try to wrap things up before I invite you to ask any questions about these SEP principles. And I want to remind you that there's 4 places where you can implement these changes. Whether it's this semester or starting next semester, I'd like you to think about the following. The first is the syllabus. And I've put this image up because the syllabus can be a very intimidating document itself to a student. It's a very lengthy document most of the time because we have a lot of things that we have to communicate as instructors. And then if you add the assignments and describe those assignments, if you add a course schedule at the end, this could be a very lengthy document that students don't want to read. But we have to talk about it, and not just on the first day of class, but we're normalizing the syllabus as a resource. And so it's very easy, I think, for any student to look at a syllabus, maybe even in public speaking like this. It's just like, it seems old, it's out of date, it's intimidating, but it is so important to just kind of demythologize what a syllabus is for, that it's a resource, and that it should be used as such, not just on the first day, but throughout the whole semester. So that's the first place, because that's where our course starts, is in our syllabus design. But also in terms of the structuring of in-class activities and exercises, the language that we use for these prompts, but also in designing activities themselves, that we can create a more inclusive environment for our students. And then we also want to ensure that we're using wise feedback statements. We're providing constructive feedback when we respond to student work. This is one of the other areas where we're teaching. And if you're teaching an online course, besides delivering the material, that's the only other opportunity really that you have to teach, is to communicate this information when you're responding to student work. And so it's a tedious aspect of teaching, as we all know as educators, but it is so important to personalize those messages, to use wise feedback, and to do this in a constructive way. And I'm going to talk more about providing feedback on student work in a future workshop this semester. Now, the last thing I want to mention is just in terms of course messaging. At the very beginning of this presentation, I mentioned the importance of early interventions, sending emails, course messages, talking to students early in the semester when we notice that they are falling behind, that they're maybe not attending class as much as their peers. So it's so important to do that, even if we are incredibly busy. I just want to encourage you to maybe use some of the language on the SEP website to create a blurb that you're basically copying and pasting into an email to a student, but you're personalizing that email to use the student's name. Maybe even personalize it further by recognizing something about their personality, their achievements, maybe knowing that they went on a trip recently or that they're majoring in something, they have some experience. You put that in the email, and it just adds this personal touch that speaks to the student, and they know, oh, this is somebody that I can trust. They actually care about me. There's data to suggest that if students receive these emails, they're much more likely to come to class and stay in the course as compared to if the instructor doesn't message them at all, which is a very easy thing to do because our student didn't come to class. Well, that's their problem. I think we have to take a more caring approach and sort of understand that students have a number of reasons why they might miss class, and we have to meet them in the middle and acknowledge those struggles are totally normal and that they still have a place in the classroom and can succeed. All right, so these are the sort of student-centered institutional structures and policies that I want to end with here is not just kind of normalizing, like, collecting data from our students and how that should be something we do with every class we teach, but also to establish communities of practice. And you're already doing some of that by virtue of attending this workshop today, either via live stream or you're watching this presentation later on the recording, because that shows, well, that you care about teaching as a practice. So I really encourage you, as again, to put a shameless plug in for the Spring 2025 Teaching Conference, to reach out to others and practitioners in the field and to share your experience with other instructors, graduate students or faculties, and these conferences that are offered through CTL are really the best place to do that. But also just generally to be talking with your colleagues and peers about the things that you do in the classroom. I have learned so much about my sort of practice as a teacher
from faculty members and graduate students who teach, because I get ideas from all of them that I incorporate into my own classes. So it's very easy to kind of want to do this on your own, just like writing is thought of as a kind of individual process, you do by yourself, not to be bothered, but it really should be a more social process. And then generally just to spread the word about the Student Experience Project. I may perhaps come across as evangelical in my spreading of this message, but this is just speaking to how strongly I feel about these practices and principles, and why indeed I chose to speak about SEP for this first workshop. It's at the heart of everything that I do in my public speaking class, and it starts one class at a time. As we know, revising a syllabus takes time. Coming up with good assessments in the form of assignments takes time. In-class activity, it takes time, right? So just doing this one class at a time, I think is a manageable approach. I'm doing this with public speaking. I found incredible success in this class with this approach, and it's now going to trickle into other classes that I'm teaching, such as interviewing, such as communication research methods, and perhaps the CJ 400 class, the undergraduate seminar in communication. So to conclude, I would just like to encourage us to keep this conversation going. And at this point, I just want to say thank you again for attending this workshop or presentation, whether it's via live stream today or watching this presentation later. I thank you so much.